what I feel when I open it up to read it again is just this invitation to beauty, like I've really never experienced in another book.
Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Memoria Press.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. I'm Jessica Gardner, and I've got with me today Martin and Tanya. Paul is out today, but we will make sure his contributions are shared. Today's episode is going to be a discussion where we're each going to share a few books that have influenced us the most over the years. And apropos to that, we get to always share what we're reading. And on this round, I'd like to hear if what you're reading right now is going to influence you or won't ever end up in a list that you'll remember.
You're looking at me, so I assume you're asking me. I'm listening to one of the Sharp books by, what's his name? I'll give it a minute. The British author. You could start with Sharp's Tigers, the first one.
You've talked about it so much, I should know his name.
I'm in the third one.
That's not Harlan Coben, is it?
No.
Okay, because you've talked about him recently.
No. I'll think of it in a minute. But they're British. It's about British in India in the military, and it's so utterly realistic. I've read a lot about British India, John Masters' books, Bhawani Junction,
which I did not like.
Deceivers, yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Well, you read Deceivers.
I did.
And it's just a period that fascinates me. Here, it's during the British Empire, and they're running India and having all these problems because they keep all these factions are fighting each other for different reasons, and they get involved in this. Anyway, the reader, I'm listening to it, and the reader is just fabulous and does all the Indian voices, the different kinds of British voices. Mm-hmm. Sharp is just a lower class Englishman, and yet whoever's the guy who's reading this can do that voice just as well as these aristocrats who are the officers, and he becomes an officer even though he's not an aristocrat because he saves a general's life. And it's just the best storytelling, the utterly realistic setting.
Probably not going to be on your list of most influential books.
No.
Just
entertainment.
But you asked me
what I was reading.
Entertainment. Well, she also asked you if it was...
It's not, I mean, if you ask me just for pure pleasure, what I would recommend, and there are some, this is very realistic, so it's not, there's no morality problems, but there's those issues for other people in the story because it's very realistic. So you have to be careful with it. It's a very much a book for adults, for a mature adult, yeah. But just the best historical fiction I think I've ever read.
Oh, really?
Okay. Oh yes.
Huh.
Okay.
Yeah. Bernard Cornwell. There's it came to me. Bernard Cornwell. He has written an Arthurian series. He has written an Anglo-Saxon Invasions of England, a series about that. There are 22 books in the Sharp series.
Is it
this
all?
Guy puts really high quality stuff out at high volume. It's amazing.
Is it all fiction, or is
it's all fiction?
Written?
Yeah,
okay,
it's all fiction. Mm-hmm. Yeah, somebody called him the best historical fiction writer.
And when did he write?
Oh, he's still writing.
Oh, he's a current author.
Yes, and the show Sharp's. I don't know, it's called Sharp's Rifles. That's the second. I can remember the name of the show. In England, the TV show is very popular. I watched an episode and it's good, but it's not nearly the quality of the books.
I think sometimes when you watch a show, when you've become attached to characters, it's really hard, which is why Wendell never wanted his books to be made into Wendell Berry, because he said to me once, I just can't imagine that anybody could be those characters in my head. Who could pull that off? They're not ever going to be.
Right.
Because those characters to him are real people.
Well, and if I was an author, I would feel the same way.
Well, Tolkien felt that way.
Yes.
Look what happened to him.
Oh, right, yeah. Well.
Oh, what about you, Tanya?
Well, War and Peace.
Page number?
907.
Progress.
Yes. I have 25 more pages.
Oh, so you just got past the introduction.
Oh, yeah. I have 25 more pages in volume 3. Then I have to read volume 4. And then the epilogue's 100 pages.
Sure it is. Why not?
Right. So, but I am thoroughly enjoying it. Would it be on my list of most influential books? No. Would it be on my list of great accomplishments in my life? Yes, it would. But I do thoroughly enjoy it. And I've even gotten where I'm enjoying the scenes about the war because they are full of Tolstoy's determinism. But he has really interesting takes on why each side won different battles. I think his take on Napoleon is interesting. I'm interested all the way around now. It did take me a while in the first war scene.
I was just going to ask that. Did your admiration or appreciation of those scenes come later?
Yes,
as you got into it.
It did as I got into it. Huh. Or maybe he just got better as he wrote.
It took long enough, so maybe.
Well, it takes a long time to create a world, and that's what Tolstoy does.
Yeah.
You have to fill it out, and you have to fill it up. And
well, at the beginning, there are so many characters, and then you get to the war, and there's that many more characters. Because at that point, you've got all these generals and officers who are minor, but it's a bunch more Russian names that you have to learn. So that's a little bit of the problem with War and Peace is that, that's a real hurdle to get over. But it's worth getting over. I would definitely recommend it for anybody that wants to read an epic.
And tell me I know you said before, what's the translation that you're using? Can you remind
Pavir
people?
and Volkonsky, I think is his wife's name. They did it together. I always say Pavir, and I leave her out, which is terrible because she had just as big, from what I read, I mean, her contribution was just as large as his. They did this together as a joint project, but I can never remember her Russian name. Okay. So I'm getting better with Russian names, though, as I read 900 pages of them.
Something maybe starting with V and put a ski on the end.
Right.
You're pretty
Got
good.
it.
Well, that's what I just did. I may not have gotten it, but it's close.
I'm still trucking through the Lincoln Highway.
Oh, well, it's a big book.
It is. And I just started, I don't know if this is going to be one of my most influential books, but I just started Falling Upward by Father Richard Rohr. And a lot of people love his writing.
Yes.
And I haven't ever tried it before.
I've never read him before either. Have you read Rohr?
Yeah.
But he is very popular.
He is. And anyway, so.
Well, let us know if you like it.
People rave about it. So
yes,
we'll see
if
it makes it into anything that impacts me.
What's the author's name again?
Rohr. Richard Rohr.
R-O-H-R.
He's very.
Don't even think.
I hear about him all the time, so I feel like I should read something by him. So I'm going to let you do that vicariously for me while I finish War and Peace. No, I'm not reading anything.
It's better that direction than the other direction in terms of length.
I've got to finish this book.
Although Lincoln Highway's
it's big, but it's a much faster read.
Yeah,
no Russian names.
No, simple. All right. Well, who wants to go first and share one of the books that has had the most influence on them? And Tanya, you've got your stack here. If you're listening, you can't see it, but Tanya has a stack of her books. Where do you want to start?
Because I followed the rules and the instructions for the day.
I'm surprised they let her put that stack in front of her with the camera because I'm not sure the camera can fully
appreciate them.
Well, I think you're behind the books. So I hope our viewers can see you behind that stack.
I think they can. We were supposed to bring 5. I obviously have more than that, but I can explain that. And you have none, so I think I could actually do the whole thing. But we do want to also point to Martin's book list.
Yes,
on our website that people can refer to for children's books.
That's right. We have a list of books for boys that Martin has compiled, and Lee Lowe also has a book list for girls,
which I forced because Martin kept talking about books for boys, and I said, is anybody ever going to think about poor girls? And so Lee put together a list. She has 4 daughters, and she put together a list for girls. So they're both on our website with Martin's original book list, which has all ages.
Oh, yes.
Well, I mean, and the reason I had the whole premise of my boys' talk is that you hear this from homeschoolers that boys are not reading like they should. So that's why I didn't have one for girls, because girls are doing what they're supposed to do. Boys, as usual, are not. So that's why I put that list together, because my thesis was that the kind of books that the book industry wants to foist on boys is not what boys really like.
Well, I think the same is true for girls too.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, my daughter, and the other thing is the girls will read books that boys really like a lot more easily than vice versa. That's what I found in my family. My daughter, she read all the same books my boys did, and she was just fine with that. She had a bookshelf of Louis L'Amour novels about that wide. So that's another peculiarity of.
I had two brothers. I would not have read their books. I never read their books. The Hardy Boys, no.
Oh, well.
I was not. I was Nancy Drew all the way.
I know, that's just the
So I don't know that I agree with you, but what's new? It's a shame we don't have Paul here. Poor Jessica is having to run interference between you and
Both
me.
of you.
Yeah. That's,
Yes.
I don't
envy me.
Yeah.
And you normally share this list when you speak.
I'm doing another talk. It's called 10 More Books for Boys. It's my most popular talk because so many mothers are having this problem of boys who are not reading. And if you give them the right stuff, they will like it. I also actually give some recommendations on movies, which people like too.
Okay.
I have a sort of curated list of, so for example, I have one new this year on Western movies, the old classic Western movies, because they have the same advantages, I think, for boys as the books do. And so just saw last night Flaming Arrow with Elvis Presley.
Oh my gosh.
Well, one of my points is that almost every great actor in Hollywood back in the 40s, 50s did a Western. They were so popular that everybody did Westerns. That was the most popular genre in movies for probably 20, 30 years.
You should also choose some of your favorite audible narrators for boys' books, because that could help to generate interest in reading for boys. And you're doing this talk. Is this your plenary talk at the conference?
Our conference here?
Yes.
No. I'm doing another one for that, but this is for the great homeschool conferences that we do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And so I'm doing that all over the country.
Okay. Then let me just tell you right now, you better have that list.
I know. I'm putting together a list. Yes, I am. Because they
so that we can give it out.
They will.
Yes, because instead he used to stand up there and say,
go to the.
If you would like to have a copy, if you would like to know what these books are, go see Tanya Charlton at our booth.
And then I would give them her email address. That was what.
Yes, and he did on a podcast. And so I was just inundated suddenly with all these people. I didn't have his list. He didn't think to share it with me. He just literally told people to come to me and get it.
But we will be sharing it. If you are listening, you can find these lists
just
linked.
Email Tanya.
No, do not.
Linked in our show notes. And if you're watching on YouTube, we'll put it in the show description. So you will be able to find these. They're at your fingertips. And they're also on our website. You can search books for boys or girls. Yep. Okay. Tanya.
Okay.
Start us off.
Okay. So the books that have been influential to me, it's like I'm going back through my life, through literature. The first one I picked up was The Mysterious Affair at Styles, which was my turn on to classic British literature. Agatha Christie, this is her first book. And I found her it was the summer after my first year of college. So I was 18. And I read 35 books that summer, and they were all Agatha Christie. And my parents, one of the things that they did that was so wonderful is they always let us buy whatever books we wanted whenever we wanted. So I remember in the summer being at home, nothing else to do, missing, college life, but being at home and saying, I need, I'd be close to the end of an Agatha Christie and I'd say, I need some more. And Mom would give me money and give me the car and I'd go off and buy 5 or 6 more. And that got me through that summer until I could get back to my friends and college life.
So what makes that one stand out, though? Because she has
Oh, it doesn't really.
Oh, really? Okay.
It doesn't. It's just that it happens to be the first one that she wrote. I don't even remember the first one that I read. It could have been this one. I tend to read things in order chronologically. But because she has different main characters, I probably read all of Poirot, all of Marple, just working my way through that way, or whatever they had in the bookstore.
Yeah.
Because it was pre-Amazon days. So that's my youth.
Okay.
And then I also brought when my boys were little, I was in a book group with some amazingly smart women. And we took this book, Half Savage and Hardy and Free, Women and Rural Radicalism in the 19th Century Novel by Judith Weissman, who died while we were doing this book. This took us a couple of years. She literally deals with every major author, like in a paragraph. And then we would read the paragraph, say, about Hawthorne. And then we would read, oh, look, here's the list of what we read. This is my list. So when we did the chapter on George Eliot, I read Middlemarch. I think we all read Middlemarch, but sometimes, like Dickens, I was the only one that read Dombey and Son, and everybody else read something different. We all read Vanity Fair, Frankenstein, and Dracula, which I never would have read on my own. That's the thing about a book group, is you will read things that you haven't read. I found Trollope. This book made a huge difference to me in introducing me to all of these. I mean, I'd majored in college in literature, so I had read quite a bit, but I had never read Trollope. I had read Thomas Hardy. I hadn't read Forster. I mean, it was just a really great experience. So that's my young adult influence. And then I think we're just going to say the Bible is not in my list because that's been a part of my whole life. And I think we would all agree that that is the most influential book in our lives. So I think we can just kind of put that aside as being just, that is the book for all of us. So I did bring Mere Christianity, though, because when I first read Mere Christianity, this really helped in a major way to solidify my faith and why I believed. And so this book means a lot to me, and I've reread it several times because to me it is my foundational book about faith, that in the same way that Climbing Parnassus is my foundational book for learning about classical education. So then I brought this book, Warriors of God, Richard the Lionheart, and Saladin in the Third Crusade. This was my introduction to the Middle Ages with Cheryl Lowe. When I was teaching Famous Men of the Middle Ages, when I first started teaching, and I didn't know a lot about it, and I was teaching famous men, and so I bought every remaindered book at Barnes & Noble and at Borders, and so I really educated myself in order to be able to teach fifth grade, which is just really a bit ridiculous.
I have never heard of half these books.
Mere Christianity?
Who wrote what was it called?
Oh, James Reston Jr. It's really good. It's just one of the ones that I used out of so many. But it was, for me, it was a really great time for me to actually be immersing myself in one thing for a year and then figuring out how to make all of this come alive for my students. It was really over the top to do this kind of prep to teach fifth grade, but that's just who I am. And finally, I have 2 Wendell Berry books because this is the first one so we came to our church, not the one we're currently at, but the one that where we were before. Wendell's daughter Mary was on the search committee that brought us to the church as a senior minister. And I knew her dad was an author, I'd never read anything by him. Didn't really have any opinion at all. But the first Christmas, we had an open house for the church, and she came and she gave us this signed book by her dad. And I was afraid to read it because she and I, by that, there are very few people in your life, I think, who are true kindred spirits, who truly are like you connect soul to soul, and she is one of those people for me. And that's not a relationship that you can make happen. There are very few people in my life. I've got a lot of friends, but she and I really connected very quickly. Mm-hmm. So by this time, I had known her long enough and liked her so much, and we were really getting close, really less than a year into our relationship. But I was afraid to read this book because I thought she just thought the world of her dad. And I thought, what if this is awful? What if he really can't write? I mean, what am I going to say? So I put it on a bookshelf. Finally, it was on my bookshelf at least a year. I never picked it back up. Finally, for some reason, I read the story. I just decided during nap time for my boys one day, I was going to read Fidelity, which is another book she gave me. So I sat down and read that story, and I thought, oh, you have been a fool. He was a brilliant author, and so I then picked this back up and read it. But it was, I just was foolish, but I didn't know, and I was just afraid it would mess with our relationship.
Which book is that again?
This is The Wild Birds, but I brought Jayber Crow too because this to me is his masterpiece, and this was the first book that my husband and I typed for him. Mm-hmm. So this means a lot to me too because it was the beginning of a business relationship, but also a great friendship that I valued dearly. Mm-hmm. So
that's Jayber Crow.
This is Jayber Crow.
By
Sorry,
Wendell Berry.
Thank you. Radio, right?
Right.
Oh, so that's my little. I brought Excellent Women by Barbara Pym, which I don't know that this influenced me, but it was this. Have you read this?
I haven't. So should I?
You should. I know you don't like murder mysteries, and this is not one. So maybe this is a book I could recommend that you would actually like. It's about a little English village, Excellent Women. It's about a little English village with little English women in it. And it's very good, but it's like a genre that Angela Thirkell and there was somebody else on the tip of my tongue have written in this genre of just like village life. Mm-hmm. There's a Martin, I don't know if you've ever seen the Miss Read books, READ. Mm-hmm. There's a big series of books. They're probably out of print, but she's a school teacher in a little village. And so there's a bunch of them, and they're just quaint books about life in an English village. And I think maybe Miss Marple would really be my first introduction to that kind of thing. But this was a real introduction to that genre just all by itself.
Wonderful.
That's it.
That's all?
Well, it's more than the 5. It's more than the 5. But if you count Wendell as one author,
right,
it's still 6. But see, this one gave me the opportunity to talk about all kinds of people who were influential in my life.
And give us the title and the author again.
Well, it may be out of print.
Okay.
It's called Half Savage and Hardy and Free: Women and Rural Radicalism in the 19th Century novel. Judith Weissman. I highly recommend it for a book group. It is, I can't remember because I haven't read it in so long. But I don't think it's not like postmodern feminism at all. Okay. Even though it sounds like it might be, but she wrote this book in 1987. So I really think it's probably, I hesitate to recommend something that I haven't read for a while, but I do think it's probably fine and not going to be filled up with hate toward men or.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's an advantage.
Do you want to borrow my stack since you don't have one?
I've got my own stack. Thank you. Yeah, are you looking at me because you want mine now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You know, I love to put together a book list, but this almost was too indefinite for me because the one book that I have probably read 12 times that's an easy pick for me. And then there's kind of all the rest. So the one book that really influenced my thinking more than any other book is G.K. Chesterton's Orthodoxy.
Oh, that's the book I can't get through.
Oh, yeah. Well, I might not be able to get through some of these over here.
Well, you should do a class on it or something. Maybe we should
do.
No, I mean a Memoirs Press little book club thing, so I can get through it to help me through it.
Yeah.
I feel like I need help with Chesterton.
Oh no, you have to. And I I said this we several of the classical people have the classical unplugged panel at these great homeschool conferences. We're doing that again this year, and we have fairly large audiences for those. And so I made the mistake one time because we were talking about Chesterton and Lewis. And Lewis was a great admirer of Chesterton, and he talks about the orthodoxy as well. And my experience has been that Lewis is a great sort of what's happening to my throat here? Lewis is a great stepping stone, I think, to Chesterton because he read him, he was influenced by him, but he writes in a much more accessible, journalistic, almost kind of style.
Dale Ahlquist also helps me with Chesterton.
And Dale Ahlquist is a good interpreter, I would say, of Chesterton. And so I said to one of these conferences, I said, it was just an inspiration at the moment. I said, Lewis is Chesterton for dummies. And what I meant was,
oh my God.
I meant it actually.
You meant it like those books.
Well, I have used several of those books. There's several of them that are very good for what they're, the one on research writing.
Right.
A couple, I think they're very good. I meant it as a compliment, but it didn't go over that one here. There was, ooh.
Oh, God.
And so I had to explain myself. But what I meant was that you really probably need to read a writer like Lewis before you try to attempt Chesterton. Because Chesterton also, and in fact, the irony is that Lewis was the Oxford professor, and Chesterton was just a journalist. He was never any, but he's, and I think Lewis would have said this. He's by far the greater writer and thinker, and so,
but not as accessible as Lewis.
As accessible. So I just want to sort of put a caution in here for people because Chesterton is writing at a level. And it seems advanced for us, but he was writing for newspapers in England in the Edwardian era, the early 20th century, after Queen Victoria dies, and so it's not going to be an easy book for a lot of people, but it'll just give you an excuse to read it again because it is such a great book. We publish it here. It's with my introduction actually, where I talk about him. And so orthodoxy, I think, would just be there's that book, and then there's all the rest,
everything else.
Then there's everything else, and Lewis's Mere Christianity. You have that here. Lewis's Mere Christianity is the best book of Christian apologetics I think that's ever been written, and it's not even long.
That's right.
Not one of the longer ones in your stack there. And then of course the Lord of the Rings I think is I feel in my list from here on out there's some offbeat things, but a lot of it's pretty conventional.
Well, mine was kind of offbeat.
Well, yours was radical women writers, and but a lot of these are going to sound pretty conventional. Lord of the Rings, everyone likes Lord of the Rings. I think that anything by Russell Kirk is, in terms of nonfiction, Russell Kirk, and I would say secondarily Roger Scruton, in terms of culture and sort of a cultural conservatism. Those are the writers to read. Russell Kirk's The Roots of American Order is the best thing on American history and civilization I think I've ever read. Roger Scruton was an Englishman. He died not too long ago.
Not too long ago.
But these were people you imagine, and Scruton was sort of this, just a country gentleman. There's so many. I don't know. Trollope was actually worked for the postal service,
right?
But these country gentlemen. Well, Walter Scott would be an example of this, who just lived out there, and they wrote in their leisure time, and so you get this from Scruton very much. But his writing and his thinking is just marvelous. And Russell Kirk is the American Roger Scruton. And then, of course, all those, again, I feel conventional, War and Peace and Anna Karenina are books that when you read them, you'll never forget them. They'll be just a part of your mental furniture. And so those are necessaries. And then there's all these writers who I just depend upon for common sense. They'll always have the right view of something. I mean, people said this of Chesterton. If you want the right view of something, go read what Chesterton says about it. And I actually have a book. I've never seen it before or since. I bought it at Sam Johnson's bookstore in Santa Monica, California. It's called An Index to Chesterton, and it's a subject index.
Oh, wow!
Of all his books.
Wow.
And so if I ever want to read what Chesterton said about, I have the index there.
Do you have all of his books?
I don't have all of his books. No, he wrote over 200 books. I have a lot of them.
Did he really?
Oh, yeah.
Are they all in print?
No. No, and I do have some that are out of print. And but there's certain authors who I can always rely on for a view of books or culture or whatever. One is Jacques Barzun, who wrote From Dawn to Decadence, which is
on my list.
You can just, and that's a book you can just pick up at any point in it and just start reading.
I couldn't do that. That would make me nervous.
Well, I know it would, but I mean, you don't. It's a big book,
but it's very readable.
You don't have to read it stuff at the beginning to understand what he's saying it in the back part of the book. Also, I would say Harold Bloom, who was who was Jewish. He was a book critic, and he just died recently too. And his book on Shakespeare is just transcendent.
I've got that, but it's in the stack of I haven't read yet.
Yeah, and he will go wrong in some places because he's a little bit of a Freudian in some of his interpretations of things. But if you know that, you can just discount for that.
Right.
And he's so wise. He's somebody was interviewing one time, and he said he had read every book that mattered.
Wouldn't you love to have that list?
I would love to have that list. Well, he does, and he does have books that have certain lists. There's one book. It's not How to Read a Book, but it's something similar. I can't remember the name, and it's just short little assessments
of books,
of all kinds of different great books.
That sounds great.
Oh, it is. It's wonderful. And so Harold Bloom, Terry Eagleton is another literary critic.
I have never heard of Terry Eagleton.
His book, if you take a literature, any kind of lit crit type of class in college, his book, Introduction to Literary Criticism, is like a bestseller. It's the only literary critical book that is an actual bestseller because so many people have read it.
Eagleton.
Terry Eagleton.
I've never heard of this.
Now, okay, qualifications here. He at least thinks of himself as a neo-Marxist.
Oh.
But he's clearly gone past that and has, I think at this point in his life maybe, is looking back on that part of his life a little bit. But he's thoroughly Christian. And people will say, how
he's
can you
a Christian neo-Marxist.
It sounds strange. But
and this has influenced you.
Okay, and some of his stuff, particularly his early books, it'll be like, it's more like the social gospel type of thing. But I will read writers who don't agree with me on everything.
I will too, but that's because we're mature adults.
Exactly.
I think for students to read things like that, they need to do it with an adult who can guide them. That's the thing, is the books that we're talking about aren't necessarily for the classroom at all. They're personal books that we've read as adults.
Right. But these are books that have affected my thinking, and I think that, And even the Introduction to Literary Criticism book, I was scared to read that because I'm thinking, this is used in all these colleges and universities that are all woke.
Right.
And,
That's
this is one of the reasons. And I read that book and I'm thinking, yeah, of course, this is, and because he's not doing politics and he's talking about literature, and he's just a great writer. And his book, Culture in, I need to remember that book because it's the book I'm thinking of. Maybe I'll remember the title that he wrote is all about how all the things we are using as a culture to replace a belief in God. And it is utterly fascinating. Oh, it's all of these modern heresies. We'll maybe post that
just for Western culture.
This is for
the heresies. The book you're talking about
of our thinking and all the things that are what you call them, surrogate deities for us,
like
today.
money, power.
Yes,
those kinds of things.
But those are more obvious ones. He's got some others that are not as obvious.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, and then so there's more, but I have.
But that's more than 5.
Mm-hmm.
Well, over here.
Yeah, we just can't get it to 5.
I've actually only got 2.
Can't do that.
That's amazing, Jessica. How many does Paul have?
He has 8.
I bet we can guess some of Paul's.
You think so? You
yes.
want to try?
The Count of Monte Cristo.
Definitely. The Count of Monte Cristo.
That's
Anna
on here?
Karenina.
That's on here.
Jaber Crow.
Yes.
We've got 3 out of the 8.
Okay.
Okay, what else have you got?
You can guess his favorite author and then think of some titles.
Oh, Graham Greene.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, you like that.
Oh, well,
Yes.
I mean, what would they be?
He listed Monsignor
End of the
Quixote.
Affair? Oh, he just listed
didn't
one.
list that.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
But he does love
He does.
that
Well, he
book.
loves them all. Okay, what else did he give?
Those were his personal favorites.
Okay,
You listed them all. Jaber Crow,
Boy,
Anna
we
Karenina,
know him, don't we?
The Count. And professionally, you can probably guess those 2.
Climbing Parnassus is on his list. I don't know. Tanya knows about this.
That's Father Leo's book.
Oh, Father Leo's book. Yes. So that's actually that's a thesis. And the interesting thing is, so Father Leo is at the Far Oratory in Far, Texas, down Edinburgh, McAllen area on the border.
Okay.
And he's just an amazing person. And his thesis for his PhD it's this big, bound in a thesis book. So we were coming down to do training at his school, Paul and Cheryl Lowe and me. So we were asking, what if they had anything in particular they would like us to talk about. So Father Leo mails us his dissertation and says he would like somebody to speak on it. So we gave it to Paul, who literally read it on the plane. Enough of it, he's
Got the overview.
He's the best educated of all of us. Yes, he did. And then he gave one of the best speeches that I've ever heard Paul give on that dissertation. If it weren't so big, I feel like we would publish it. Maybe at some point we'll just publish a piece of it. I don't know. But I totally get it. And
it was on classical education or anything?
Yes, it was on classical education. And Paul talks about it. He's kept it. He's got it at his desk. And it did really influence him, that run through that thesis. So when he spoke, using some of Father Leo's points, I think, he was really engaged and fired up and passionate about it. And I could hear that in his talk. It was a good talk. He should give it again.
And we mentioned Climbing Parnassus. If I was to do a list of books on classical education, there would be 2 books at the top, and one would be that one. But I didn't realize this till just recently again, that the reason I knew about R.W. Livingston's A Defense of Classical Education was because Tracy mentions it in there, I believe. And so we had at Memoria Press Books, Memoria College Books, we are reprinting Livingston's A Defense of Classical Education, and I would put those two books at the very top.
So would Tracy.
Okay,
I don't think Tracy would put his own, but he would definitely put Livingston. I found out about the Livingston book from Cheryl, who wanted to publish it. And so we found it and we formatted it, but we never did anything. Like, it was just one of those projects that got put aside.
And what's the title?
A Defense of Classical Education.
Okay.
Defense with a C, because he's British.
By Livingston.
By R.W. Livingston.
Okay.
Yeah, he was writing, that book was printed in 1917. And again, Tracy is the only one I've ever heard who even talked about this, but there was a big debate that went on in the first 2 decades of the 20th century about the value of classical education and what schools were for, because that's a time when, nobody really goes past high school. This is really actually the way it probably should be now, because we just have this whole bureaucracy that feeds on people going to school and being there and serving time. But, you went to school and you actually learned something useful, but it was very much teaching Western civilization in schools. It wasn't a jobs program. It wasn't, professional development of any kind. It wasn't.
It was general education.
Yeah, it wasn't psychology.
Education for everybody.
Psychology in class, right? And so he is the Livingston book comes out, and he's thoroughly understands what the objections are that people are throwing out at classical education, and he writes this defense that is just utterly brilliant. I reread that again recently, and it's a wonderful book. So
it's at the printer. We will have it soon.
From Memoria Press.
Yes, from Memoria Press. Okay. But Tracy, it's on the Memoria College imprint, but it'll be sold on both sides.
Okay.
Tracy told me recently that if we had done that earlier, he probably would not have written Climbing Parnassus, because that book really, he said he wrote Climbing Parnassus because there was nothing in print that made the apology for classical education that was that.
And he wrote that. Tracy still is an editor at National Review magazine, and he was an acolyte of William F. Buckley Jr., who, the great conservative thinker who ran that magazine, founded it in 1955. And it was Buckley who pressed him to write the book, he told me.
Well, this and Climbing Parnassus.
It's the American version of the Livingston book.
That's right.
Interesting.
We need this. We need this book,
we do.
Because this is, I feel like it's more accessible, easier to read than the Livingston book. They're both making the same points, but they're making them differently.
Yeah.
And Tracy's he is just a wordsmith.
Yes.
His writing is beautiful, and his sentences, every sentence has been thought about. So I would consider that we need both.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
You can't have too many apologies for a classical education.
And Livingston, I believe, is British.
Yes.
So you're getting a slightly different angle on it, because Tracy talks a lot about the Founding Fathers in
yes,
this
he
book.
does.
It's the best treatment of classical education and the Founding Fathers that you'll ever find. And to back up Tanya's point, Tracy, I want to write like Tracy when I grow up. I mean, Tracy has the most beautiful writing.
He does prose. Yes,
it's almost leisurely. He's got that sort of leisurely journalistic style that I just absolutely love. It's very similar to Joseph Epstein's writing, another favorite of mine, and another writer I would recommend, the essays. He's got probably 30 books of essays. I'd read any one of them, Joseph Epstein. But I love Tracy's writing. It's just a pleasure to read.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. So what are your two?
My two, the top is A Severe Mercy.
Oh, yes.
I've talked about it before. I think I said a couple episodes ago, I try to read it every year. I haven't gotten to it the last 2 years or so. And I was trying to think about why it was so formative to me. And I think what I feel when I open it up to read it again is just this invitation to beauty, like I've really never experienced in another book, even though it's someone's memoir. Can we call it a memoir?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a memoir of people's love and their life of working out their faith. I just found it to be so tremendously beautiful. And invitation into a consideration of beauty that I hadn't ever experienced before.
Hadn't experienced, or really for me, I hadn't ever, that concept of severe mercy.
That's right.
Is so unique. I had never even considered anything like that.
Mm-hmm. And the beauty, I think, of broadly love, God's love, how it's so multifaceted in the ways that it enters into your life.
Yes.
And not giving any spoilers in case you haven't read it. And the love between two people who are bound to each other through their love, and then ultimately through their common faith. All of that played out and was woven together in such a, it was,
he's a good writer too.
He is.
That helps.
Well, and his poetry.
And we should point out that Tracy Lee Simmons is Sheldon Van Auken's godson.
That's right.
And lives in Sheldon Van Auken's cabin.
He does at UVA. And Tracy has done a seminar here.
Mm-hmm.
On the book.
Yes, at our conference on the Severe Mercy book. It was a few years ago at our summer conference, and I could not go. But if that's recorded, I might have to get a hold of that.
Yes,
I should.
It would be nice because he talks really about his personal relationship.
Really? Okay.
Yes, and it's very good
to listen to that.
Yeah.
Okay. My second book is obscure, but so formative. It's called The End of Our Exploring by Matthew Lee Anderson. He got his...
Never heard of it.
Yeah. He got his I think it was a DPhil in ethics at Oxford, and now he teaches ethics at Baylor. But he's a philosopher, a writer, and he wrote The End of Our Exploring really as I would say, a guidebook through his reflections on how to question well and how to hold the questions of others in your community or in your family, how to kind of move through probably what he would call like the purgative fires of like life's difficulties that raise questions, or when you're faced with like just the ambiguities or the what is happening. And it's a really beautiful book.
I'm going to have to find that.
The End of Our Exploring. Well, interestingly, a few months ago, he totally revamped and republished it, and he re-released it as a book he retitled Called Into, let me get it right. Yeah, Called Into Questions. He looked back, it's at 10 years old. He looked back and thought, like that was pretty angsty of me. And so he rewrote several parts of it pretty significantly. It just came out, so I haven't read it yet, but I want to reread, and just because I've read the initial one so many times, and I just felt, I related to it so much, but it didn't end there because it's really equipping. It's formative and equipping, which I think was helpful. It's been very helpful to me. And I'm interested to know, a decade later, I've changed, the book has changed. I want to see like what is different.
Right. Oh, I would be really curious about that too.
And it's brand new. So it's on my list to grab, but when I have time to just enjoy it, I don't want to rush.
Right.
So I think if I had a bonus third book, I don't want to say it influenced me greatly, but one of the most enjoyable things I've read in the last maybe 5 years, is Anthony Doerr's All the Light We Cannot See.
I was wondering if you
I loved that book. It was beautifully written.
I liked it. Have you read the Cuckoo Land one?
No.
Cloud Cuckoo Land?
That's one of the...
Is that the
I don't know the title.
Yes, it is. I think Paul read it, but then I'm not sure what he thought about it.
Okay.
It was different, but I read All the Light You Cannot See. I enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say it was my favorite.
Okay.
But I certainly didn't go on to read anything else by him. But I did enjoy the story. I think he's a good storyteller.
I did too. They just Netflix took it and turned it into a show.
I saw that.
And I tried maybe the first 10 minutes, and maybe they represented it well. I don't know. But I realized watching the show how actually dark how
it's
sad
dark. It is dark.
The book is, but I didn't feel that reading it. And then I saw part of the show and thought, I can't do this.
I think it's much easier to do sad in a book than in actually watching people act out sad.
I agree.
I don't know why. But maybe because when it's just you and the book, then it's just a much more intimate relationship, I think.
And you're the architect of even what you see in your mind.
Right.
Does that make sense?
That's true, yes.
So you can
instead of somebody else telling you this is what you should see in this book.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's the case with a whole lot of things.
It is case with a whole lot of things. Well, we've missed Paul.
You have.
But it's nice to have his list. And it shows that we know him well.
All 8?
Yes.
Yes.
Did we do all 8?
We did.
Okay.
We might have left out some of his professional. We did Climbing Parnassus.
Simply Classical, of course.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He said 7 myths about education.
Oh, I love that one too. That would be at the top of my list too, right under Climbing Parnassus. Yes. Okay. I feel like that book really helped me just to know all of the different theories about education and the different things that have been tried that have, yes.
Yeah. Now that's Daisy Christodoulou's book you're talking about, 7 myths
about education.
And just, I like that book, but she is drawing on some other writers who I already kind of know. So I consider hers a little bit secondary, but a lot of what she says in that book comes from E.D. Hirsch, who wrote Why Knowledge Matters and Cultural Literacy. And so about half the book really comes from Hirsch.
Right. It's smaller. Mm-hmm. It's very, it's like a snapshot, I guess, because it is a very small book that costs I think it's like $30. And it's smaller than any of these. Right. And but it does give you just a snapshot of 7 different myths.
If we ever do a show, we probably should on 5 best education books. I would put Hirsch's Why Knowledge Matters on there. It is the best case for why you teach content. And what in his other book,
The Schools We Need and Why We Don't Have Them.
Mm-hmm. That's the best book on why we're not teaching it.
Interesting. Okay.
So much to read still.
The list keep growing.
Yes, you guys have added some things to my list.
Yeah, likewise.
Not sharp.
Not sharp, huh?
No, I'm not adding
sharp.
Like
sharp.
I don't. No, I didn't like. I didn't like The Deceivers. I don't think I would like that.
It's different from that.
But I do. I have loved several of your fun reading authors. One in particular,
which she's not going to mention because they're tough.
They are tough. They are very tough. It's James Lee Burke.
Okay.
And he is a beautiful writer. He writes classically, really.
He does, and he's a Catholic.
But the series that he writes I love the best is a detective story with a lot of violence, a lot of death, some racy scenes they are literally for mature adults.
Yeah, they're realistic.
So well written. But he also writes about Montana, some Western kind of books.
Well, in East Texas, what's that character?
Starts with an H.
Yeah.
Gotta go back.
Old here. But we be careful about recommending those because they're not immoral at all. In fact, he is a Christian writer, really.
And there's such wisdom tucked in.
And there's such wisdom tucked in there. But there is a lot of it is very realistic. And if you can't handle that realism, then don't even bother.
That's right. That's right. So you would either love them or hate them, I think.
Right.
I didn't mention Kristen Lavrenstetter. I think that made
the Hackberry Holland novels.
Hackberry, that's right. Hackberry Holland.
Yeah, the Holland families. Yeah, there's another 2 series he has. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, we have really jammed this episode full of
good thing Paul wasn't
authors.
here.
That's right.
We wouldn't have gotten finished, or either Martin and I wouldn't have been able to talk so much.
But it was good. It was good. Well, thank you for joining us today. If you would like to find the book list for boys and girls, like we said, you can check it out on our website, memoriapress.com, in that search bar, or you can go to the show notes in your podcast or the show description if you're watching on YouTube. They will be linked in those places. We're glad you're with us, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us today on Classical Etc. by Memoria Press. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, or share this episode or comment. We love to hear your questions and your comments. If you want to learn more about Memoria Press, please go to memoriapress.com. This has been Classical Etc. We're so glad you joined us, and we'll see you next time.